7 months after my pregnancy, I accidentally overheard a conversation between my husband and the poor student he had been sponsoring. Joaquin, if your wife finds out that the baby in her womb is actually our fertilized embryo, don't you think she would be so furious that she might take her own life? Beatrice said with a discreet chuckle. It would be more convenient if she did. That way, everything she owns would be mine, Joaquin replied coldly. But the problem would be if she decides to divorce me and kick me out of the house. That's why we must keep this a secret. Once our child inherits her assets, we'll deliver the final blow. That night, I pretended I hadn't heard anything. I gave birth to the baby and raised him with all the care possible. 24 years later, when my son returned from studying abroad, I transferred all the shares of my company and properties into his name. During a press conference, Beatrice, the once humble young woman, appeared holding my husband's arm and clutching a maternity test report. She walked straight up to me and declared, "Andres is my biological son. You stole him from me all these years. Now it's time to give him back." My son also threw a divorce agreement in front of me and, with a cold and calculating voice, said, "Sign this and divorce my father. That way, we can finally be the family of 3 we were always meant to be. And since you gave birth to me and raised me, I'll give you a monthly allowance of $200. I gave a slight smile and replied, "All right. Camila, didn't you have an important board meeting today? Why are you still working here in the study?" Joaquin entered with a cup of hot milk, placing it gently in front of me and using that tender tone he always used. I closed my laptop and smiled back at him. Andres' teacher mentioned he's been coughing a bit lately. I made an appointment with a pediatric specialist for tomorrow. Moved, Joaquin stroked my hair. "You always worry so much. When Andres grows up, he will surely thank you with all his heart." I looked directly at him and firmly replied, "Of course, I'm his mother. If I don't take care of him, who will?" Touched by my words, Joaquin smiled warmly. "You're amazing. Marrying you and raising Andres together has been the greatest blessing of my life." I looked into his eyes, full of affection that seemed sincere, and gave him a faint smile, without saying a word. Joaquin and I had been together for 10 years, 3 years of dating and 7 years of marriage. In that decade, he had always cared for me when I was sick or tired, surprised me in unexpected ways, and held me tightly in moments of passion, whispering that he would love me forever. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, I would never have believed that the man who claimed to love me so much could betray me like that. "Aunt Beatrice, you're finally here," Andres' excited voice echoed from the living room. I immediately got up and left the study, only to see Beatrice confidently walking in. She picked up my son in her arms and kissed him on the cheek, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Andresito, did you miss me?" she asked, her gaze falling on me. Her smile faltered for a moment, and her expression shifted to a mix of discomfort and surprise. Before she could say anything, Joaquin quickly stepped forward to explain. "Darling, there was an outdoor activity for parents and children at Andres' kindergarten today. I thought you'd be very busy with work, so I asked Beatrice to help." Beatrice put Andres down and hastily added, somewhat nervously, Yes, Camila. You've done so much for me over the years that I've always wanted to return the favor." When Joaquin called me, I didn't hesitate to come. Hearing their awkward attempts to justify her presence, I couldn't help but remember the day I gave birth to my son. Beatrice had also been at the hospital that day, accompanying Joaquin under the pretense of meeting the baby. While I endured contractions, she nervously paced the hallway, wringing her hands impatiently. When she found out it was a boy, she ran to the baby, picked him up, and refused to let him go. Her eyes sparkled with joy, reddened with emotion. A nurse, unable to hold back a smile, jokingly asked, "Who are you to the baby? You seem more excited than the mother herself." Beatrice, somewhat embarrassed, tried to explain upon noticing my silence. "Camila, I couldn't help it. Andres is so adorable that I ended up kissing him without realizing it. You're not upset, are you?" I smiled slightly and calmly replied, "Of course not. I've been so busy with work that I sometimes neglect my family. I really appreciate that you're willing to help me with Andres." Upon hearing this, both Beatrice and Joaquin seemed to relax. Andres ran up to me with an innocent expression and asked, "Mom, are you going to work today? Or will you come to kindergarten with Dad and me?" I gently stroked his head and sweetly asked, "What would you prefer Mommy to do?" Without hesitation, Andres replied, "I want Mommy to work and Aunt Beatrice to take Daddy, and me to kindergarten. As if afraid that Andres might say something inappropriate, Joaquin quickly picked him up and explained. Sweetheart, Andres just wants you to stay focused on work. Last time, he even asked me not to bother you because you're working so hard. Beatrice nodded and commented. Andres is such a considerate boy. With such an exceptional mother like you, Camila, it's no wonder he's so well-mannered. Smiling, I responded to my son. All right, we'll do what Andres says. Upon hearing this, Andres jumped with joy, completely ignoring my presence, and grabbed Beatriz and Joaquin's hands, leading them to the door. Watching them walk away together, I allowed a slight smile to cross my face before returning to my study. Maybe they thought I didn't notice anything, but I was far more aware than they imagined. I watched the trio leave the house as if they were a perfect family. Andres, holding Beatriz and Joaquin's hands, looked so happy, so innocent, completely unaware of what was truly happening around him. The smile on Beatriz's face was shameless and triumphant. Joaquin, on the other hand, wore a confident, almost disdainful expression, as if he was certain he would never be discovered. I calmly closed the door and returned to my study, but my mind was far from work. That constant charade had been going on for years, but now they had crossed all limits. Beatriz was so comfortable in my home, it was almost as if she owned the place. My own son, the one I carried for 9 months, raised and protected, didn't even hesitate to prefer her company over mine. And Joaquin had become the shameless accomplice in this entire farce, turning my life into a show of humiliation. For a long time, I stayed silent planning. But today, something inside me changed. It was time to act. I knew I couldn't act on impulse, so I sat down and began organizing my thoughts. I needed to dismantle their fake happiness little by little, with precision. I had enough information to destroy Joaquin and Beatriz in a way they wouldn't recover from anytime soon. My hands trembled slightly as I typed on the computer, gathering all the documents, emails, and evidence I had accumulated over the years. Joaquin thought I was naive, but he didn't know I had access to all his bank accounts, his emails, and even the messages he exchanged with Beatriz. I spent the following weeks acting normally, playing my role as a wife and mother. I prepared dinners, took care of the house, and even maintained my work routine, but inside, I was setting the perfect stage for my revenge. I started with Joaquin. One morning, while he was having coffee, I casually mentioned that the company was going through financial difficulties. I'll need your signature for some transfers, I lied, handing him a fake document that actually transferred part of his shares to my name. Joaquin, as distracted as always, signed without reading. Meanwhile, I kept Beatriz busy with the help she constantly asked for. She thought she was taking advantage of me, but I was using each of her requests as an opportunity to gather more evidence of her financial dependence on Joaquin, which I knew would be useful later. Andres' birthday was the turning point. As always, we threw a big party at home. Beatriz showed up early, carrying a huge gift, pretending to be the perfect godmother. Joaquin couldn't hide the sparkle in his eyes when he saw her. Throughout the party, they exchanged complicit glances, and Andres ran into her arms as if she were his real mother. Watching that scene was painful, but it also filled me with a determination I had never felt before. When all the guests had left, I approached Andres. He was sitting on the couch, excited about the gifts he had received. I sat beside him and calmly asked, Andres, do you think Aunt Beatriz likes you a lot? He smiled. Of course, Mom. She always brings me cool things and plays with me. I nodded, trying to stay calm. And do you think your father likes her a lot too? Andres paused for a moment, clearly confused by the question. I guess so. They're friends, right? I smiled and gently stroked his hair. Yes, of course. Friends. Andres' innocence cut me like a knife, but I knew he was just a piece in Joaquin and Beatriz's game. I couldn't blame him, but I also couldn't let him stay unaware of the truth for much longer. I needed to protect him, even if it meant destroying the image he had of his father. A few weeks later, the plan was in motion. First, I contacted the family lawyer, someone Joaquin had always trusted blindly but who, in reality, was more loyal to me. I explained the situation and showed him the evidence I had gathered. He was shocked but agreed to help me. We prepared the documents to freeze Joaquin's accounts and ensure he couldn't access any family assets. On the day everything fell apart for them, I made sure to be home. Joaquin arrived home early from work, clearly irritated. Camila, why are my accounts blocked? What did you do? He shouted as he entered the living room. I was sitting on the couch, calmly sipping a cup of tea. I looked at him with the calmest smile I could manage. I blocked everything. I thought it would be safer that way. After all, you and Beatriz have a history of spending money irresponsibly. Joaquin's face turned pale. How do you know about? Before he could finish, Beatriz burst into the house, panic on her face. Joaquin, my account is blocked too. I can't access anything. I slowly stood up and walked toward them. You two thought you could fool me forever, didn't you? But you forgot one thing. Never underestimate someone with patience and access to information. I showed them a stack of documents. Here's all the proof of the transfers you made to Beatriz, the records of when you used company money to pay her debts, and even the messages where you both planned how to deceive me. Beatriz tried to justify herself, but I cut her off. Save your energy. I've already sent everything to the board of directors and the lawyer. Oh, and Joaquin, the divorce is underway. Good luck trying to stay afloat once all our assets are divided. I finished with a triumphant smile. They stood frozen, speechless, as I turned and climbed the stairs. In that moment, I knew I had won. No matter what happened next, I had regained control of my life. And they were finally paying the price for their betrayal. After that day, Joaquin and Beatriz's lives began to crumble inevitably. They tried to regain control, but every move they made was anticipated by me. I had left them without financial resources and publicly exposed, and that was just the beginning. The first thing I did was finalize the divorce. With all the evidence I presented in court, including the embezzlement of company funds to finance Beatriz's whims and the messages where they plotted to take everything from me, the judge had no doubts. I was granted all marital assets and full custody of Andres, even though he wasn't biologically my son. Joaquin's lawyer tried to argue that Andres should stay with him, but I had already played another card, a testimony from the school board describing how Joaquin allowed Beatriz to act as Andres' mother and emotionally neglected me. The financial impact on Joaquin was devastating. With his accounts frozen and the company's shares transferred to my name, he lost all his power. The board members who once feared him quickly removed him from the company. All he had left was public humiliation. Newspapers began publishing stories about his betrayals, and he became a laughingstock in the social circles he once valued so much. Beatriz, on the other hand, tried to stay close to Andres, but it didn't take long for her true nature to be exposed. I discovered she had accumulated debts while pretending to build a business that never existed. Without access to Joaquin's or my money, she was forced to sell all her belongings to try to pay off what she owed. She even tried to get close to Andres directly, but he, finally realizing her true character, began to reject her. He was young but not foolish. Over time, Beatriz's lies and manipulations became clear to him. As for Andres, it was a difficult journey. He was confused and resentful at first, not knowing whom to trust. To him, Joaquin was still his father, and Beatriz had been a mother figure for much of his childhood. But I knew that time and truth were on my side. It took months, but I managed to rebuild our relationship. The truth was revealed to him little by little, helping him understand who had truly been by his side during the most important moments of his life. Joaquin tried to rebuild his life, but every door he knocked on was closed. The influence he once had disappeared. With no money, no allies, and without his powerful man image, he eventually moved to a small town, living in a modest apartment and relying on odd jobs. Whenever I hear news about him, which is rare since he's faded into obscurity, I realize that the man who once humiliated me is now just a shadow of who he used to be. And honestly, I feel nothing. No hatred, no pity. He is insignificant now. Beatriz vanished from the city. I heard from acquaintances that she went to live with a distant sister, but their relationship didn't last long. Beatriz was never someone who could support herself, and without anyone to fund her luxuries or tolerate her arrogance, she quickly faded into oblivion. Once, years later, I received a letter from her. It was pathetic. She apologized, but not out of genuine remorse. She wanted money. I tore the letter apart without responding. And me? Well, I finally felt free. The divorce, though painful at first, was the best thing that could have happened to me. I took full control of the company and restructured it, removing anyone loyal to Joaquin. Under my leadership, profits soared, and the company soon became known not just for its financial success, but also for the values I implemented. I became a respected woman in the business world and never again allowed anyone to underestimate me. Andres, in turn, grew up. He went to university, and after understanding the whole story, he began to admire me more than ever. Today, we have a strong relationship. He knows that although we aren't biologically connected, I am his true mother. He visits me whenever he can and even started working at the company. Despite everything, I raised him to be fair and honest, unlike his biological father. I am proud of the man he has become. Looking back, I see that everything I went through transformed me. I am no longer the naive woman who allowed Joaquin and Beatriz to toy with my life. Now, I am someone who has learned to stand up for herself and protect what is hers. My revenge was complete, but more importantly, it was just. I let each of them reap exactly what they had sown without dirtying my hands directly. Today, I live in peace. Joaquin and Beatriz are just names from the past, echoes of a story that no longer affects me. My life moved on, and I can proudly say that I won. My success, my freedom, and Andres' love are the only answers I need for everything that happened. They lost everything, while I gained my life back. And that, to me, is more than enough.